It's all about shared decision making. If I'm seeing you, we're coming up with decisions like you are the expert, right? And I am going to defer to your expertise. And that doesn't mean that I have no say in the matter. I read a quote recently that I really loved, which is that doctors know bodies and we know our bodies.
Hi, I'm Dr. Avanti Singh, and this is the Healing Catalyst podcast. I'm a medical doctor with over 20 years of experience and also a lifelong practitioner of Ayurveda. I created the Healing Catalyst podcast because we all deserve a different kind of conversation about health, one that's honest, holistic, and rooted in both science and soul. On this show, I'm joined by the world's leading experts to give you science-backed tools that you can start using today and actually stick with to build real health and longevity. I am so glad you're here. Now let's get to it. Hello, my beautiful friends. Happy New Year and welcome back to the Healing Catalyst podcast. I am so glad to be back with you. And if you're new here, I'm Dr. Avanti Singh. I'm so thrilled that you're here with us. So, this episode feels like the perfect way to start the new year of 2026 with a conversation that I think is long overdue. Now, if you're around my age, I'm 54, you probably remember a book from back in the day called Our Bodies, Ourselves. I actually had it on my bookshelf in college when I was at the University of Chicago, and I'm sure that people made assumptions about me because they saw it there, right? Because that book was actually quite revolutionary at the time because it gave women language to really talk about their own bodies at a time when almost no language existed. But here's the thing, that was 1970. That was 55 years ago. I was actually born in 1971. And even though it's been 50 years, 55 years, for most of that time since then, women's health has actually stayed narrowly defined, still focused mostly on reproduction, while everything else that's been studied has been studied using the male body as the default. In fact, before 1993, women were largely excluded from clinical trials. And I actually started med school in 1996. And even today, we make up less than 40% of participants in most studies. And so what happened as a result of that? Well, women's symptoms, fatigue, pain, mood changes, even the symptoms and the signs of heart attacks got minimized, dismissed, chalked up to just hormones. And that, my friends, is a real problem. But things are finally really starting to shift. The whole zeitgeist and the movement and the talk about menopause and perimenopause and women's health in the past few years has really started to shift things. And that's what we're exploring today through a groundbreaking new book called The New Rules of Women's Health, Your Guide to Thriving at Every Age. And my guest is the author of that book, Meghan Rabbitt. She is an award-winning health journalist who has dedicated her career to making complex medical information accessible and actionable for women. Her work has appeared in Women's Health magazine, Oprah Daily, Prevention magazine, and Maria Shriver's Sunday paper. And for this book, she actually spent 3 years reporting and writing, interviewing over 100 female experts to put this together. And I have to say, this book actually feels like an evolution of Our Bodies, Ourselves for this new generation. It feels like it's a manual, almost a reference book, something that you can keep on your shelf and turn to whenever your intuition tells you that there's just something that feels off and isn't right. And so today we're going to talk about how the male body became the medical default and the real consequences of that for women. We also get into heart disease and what the symptoms are for women that are different than men, because it's actually the number one killer of women. We also talk about pain and why women's pain has been taken less seriously for so long. And we also dig into what it really means to become the CEO of your own health, how to get ready for appointments, how to advocate for yourself, and how to really trust your intuition alongside real science, the data, the studies, and the information. And my hope is that by the end of this conversation, you feel empowered, you feel clearer, and you feel more confident. Because here's what I really believe. And I really think that Meghan's work reinforces this, is that your intuition is really powerful. Your symptoms are information. And when you combine this intuition and this information, along with the right knowledge and the data and the studies, you become your best advocate. You become your best doctor. And this is something that Ayurveda has really understood for thousands of years, right? That health is personal, that your body has its own unique constitution, its own patterns, its own way of talking and communicating with you. And when you learn to really understand that language, to read those signals, you really can change everything. And if you're curious about your own unique constitution or your dosha, I have a free assessment over at my new company, myarvasi.com. It's linked in the show notes. It's a really great place to start if you want to really understand your body on a deeper level. All right, let's get into the episode. Hello, Meghan. It is great to meet you.
It is.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here, and it's wonderful to meet you too.
Well, thank you. And I've heard so much about you from many people in my life. And so I'm just so excited to talk to you about this new book, The New Rules of Women's Health, because I think we need a lot of new rules. And I think this is so timely. It's an amazing contribution. I think that it's just an incredible resource for women. And I really wanted to ask you, like, how did you come to deciding to write this book? And why did you feel that it was so necessary to write this now? I mean, books take a long time to publish. So this is an idea that's been in the works, and it feels very timely because of the conversation about women's health in the past year. But how did this all happen? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I have been a health journalist for my entire career, really. I got into magazine journalism soon after graduating college, and I always gravitated towards the health beat. I just loved learning about health and interviewing doctors and really working to translate really important information into language we can all understand. And not only that, but language and advice we can put into practice in our lives, because I think that's when we really feel inspired with the new research, is when we know what it means and then if it applies to us or not and how to implement it. And so I've spent my career doing that. I wrote a piece for Prevention magazine on the female brain and why women disproportionately suffer from Alzheimer's disease, at least what we knew about it. This is years ago now, about 5 years ago. And as part of the piece, my editor asked me to interview Maria Shriver because she is such a fierce women's health advocate, particularly in the women's brain health space, founded the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, which is now part of the Cleveland Clinic. And so I got the honor of interviewing her for that story. And when it came out, Maria called me. And my initial reaction was my heart sank because I thought I missed something, I thought I got something wrong. Fact checking didn't catch something. And she called to compliment me on the feature. She said, I think you really did a great job. And will you come work for me on my weekly digital news magazine, the Sunday paper? And so, so for the last about 4-ish years, I've been working on Maria's team at Shriver Media. And about a year into working for her, she said, Meghan, given your experience, I want you to write a book for my imprint at Penguin Random House. I think we as women need a manifesto. We need a book that covers everything from puberty through menopause and beyond. And because we have a lot to learn still about sex-specific medicine, we have got a ways to go. But we have made some inroads. And so let's put together a book where we really are looking at what we know to give women the information they need to advocate for themselves, to take care of themselves and their families. And so that is what I did. I spent 3 years reporting and writing. There's over 100 all-female experts quoted throughout the book.
Amazing. Love that.
And I really did feel passionate about giving women, and this is a big book, and so it's not something you're going to cozy up with and read in one sitting at your favorite cafe, right? But the goal is for it to really be a reference, to be able to have it on your shelf or your coffee table and say, okay, what do I need to know? I've got my gynecology appointment coming up. I've got an appointment with my cardiologist coming up or my primary care physician, and I have some concerns. What do I need to know as baseline knowledge so that we can have the most productive conversation with our doctors?
Okay, so first of all, that's incredible, an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that. And taking 3 years to do the research, to interview the experts, and that too, I love that you said it was all women experts who you interviewed because that is so needed right now. And I know I talk about this a lot that why are we talking to men about women's health? Not that they shouldn't be included, yes, but there's a lot of women who are experts in the field and also women have their own experience. So like, let's talk to them. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that.
Ah,
As a physician also,
good.
I really
I'm
appreciate that.
so glad because it was very intentional on my
Yeah.
part because I really did
Mhm.
hear from clinicians like yourself and researchers, female, who are saying part of the reason why we're behind when it
Right.
comes to sex specific research and women's
Mhm.
specific research is because for far too long, women didn't have a seat at the table.
Exactly.
How were the men who were making the decisions when it came to what to research supposed to know that we should look into
Exactly.
endometriosis because they're not suffering from
Right.
crippling pelvic pain? And
Right.
so, yeah, so we've come a little ways. We've got a lot more to go, but I really wanted to celebrate the female voices who have helped us move the needle.
Yeah, which I think is so important. And the other thing I wanted to say is that this reminds me so much. I mean, obviously, I chose to become a doctor way when I was a little kid. So like I've always looked at books on health and it reminds me of a book from way back when, Our Bodies Ourselves, which
Yeah.
was almost like that unsaid manual on women's health that we had back in the day. That's what this reminds me of. Quite literally a manual to refer to.
Yeah.
Was that in your mind of
Yeah, it really was. And not only that, but I have Our Bodies Ourselves. I mean, it is an
yeah.
amazing resource that
Oh, for
is
sure.
beloved and is on so many of our bookshelves, right? And for good reason. And there is still a place for that. Really, what I aim to do with this book is
Right.
when you look at Our Bodies Ourselves, it is gynecologic health, it's sexual health, it is a feminist manifesto in terms of how
Oh, for
women
sure.
can take care of ourselves. And it really focuses on what we now call bikini medicine. It's our breast health, our sexual health, our gynecologic health, our reproductive health. These
Right.
are all amazingly important aspects of our health. And my book goes into that, but also looks at women's hearts and our brains and our immune system and some of the specialties that we are now starting to have a little more understanding about how women are different than men.
Right.
And so it's a complement to Our Bodies Ourselves. It's certainly not meant to replace, but it's meant to sort of say, okay, well, now let's talk about sex specific research that we have when it comes to things that used to not even be on our radar, like how women's hearts are different than men, our brains are different than men.
Right. When we had Our Bodies Ourselves on our shelves, and I remember in college having it on my bookshelf, and people were like, made assumptions about me. Oh, she's a feminist. She's a this. She's a right because they saw that. And I think what I'm hearing a little bit of is this idea of let's normalize this. Like this is important, and half of the population are female and they're women, and they need to know how their bodies work, and they need to know what to ask and what things to think about when they are in the medical care system. Like, what are they supposed to talk about? What should they be thinking about? What are symptoms that they should be looking out for? So I think that for me, that's how I'm sort of interpreting what you're saying.
Absolutely. And I had a high compliment from a friend who saw the galley of my book. And she's like, oh, the cover's really beautiful. I'm going to keep this on my coffee table because
Yeah,
I even want the men in my life. I want my husband to
totally.
pick this up, right? Because yes, it is a book for women. And I will say that when I was writing this book, I passed the breast health chapter to my husband because I have dense breasts. I went for my annual mammo. I needed follow-up
Sure.
ultrasound. And I was like, I need your support through this. I'm going to be a
Right.
little stressed about this and I would love to have your support. He read that
Right.
chapter and he was like, I can support you better now. And
Yeah.
so that is the goal. It's like, yeah, and now join the conversation because we've come
Right.
further now.
Yeah, and I really so appreciate the whole emphasis on the research. Like, let's talk about these things and let's talk about the research. But here's what I'm really reflecting on a lot is that, and again, this is the conversation I've been having with so many women in my life, whether it's my younger sister, my friends, my patients, my students, and also other physicians who are really close to me. Like when we were in medical school about 25 years ago, the male body was treated as the default. And I think that that is an imbalance. And let's talk about how that happened. Like, how did that happen that women were sort of looked at as small men, like smaller sized men? And the research wasn't done on that, which is why we are trying to catch up right now.
Yeah.
So how did that happen?
Yeah, my understanding based on a lot of interviews, a lot of research is it's multifactorial, right? There were assumptions made that shouldn't have been made, right? That women were just smaller versions, so if we studied men, that was going to be good enough.
Right.
There was also the fact that women are a little bit more challenging. The thought was that women are more challenging to study because we have menstrual cycles and because our hormones impact the research results. Is that a reason to not study us? Absolutely not. But it made the research more complicated. And so researchers thought, if we don't have to, let's not. And then I think there's also just we live in a patriarchal society, and for way too long, men had the seat at the table. They were pulling the levers in terms of where the research dollars were going to go, and so we just didn't. And again, women's health research is still way underfunded compared to our male counterparts. So again, we have a long way to go still. But I think those were some of the biggies when it came to why we were left out of the research.
Right. And I mean, I also know that, before 1993, like I started medical school in 1993 or 1994, women were mostly excluded, like you said, from the clinical trials. And they still make up less than 40% of the subjects in clinical trials. But in 1993 is when it sort of switched, when the NIH actually mandated that women be included. And so I think that's where some things started to change, right?
Absolutely. And pregnancy played a big role in it too, right? Our ability to get pregnant. And researchers, in fairness, didn't want to potentially be studying women of reproductive age because what if something impacted our ability to conceive and carry to term a baby, right? And so a lot of different factors played in. But yeah, 1993 was a big year. And when you think about it, gosh, that's not so long ago.
No, it's not.
Which is pretty shocking.
Right. And that we've really not made enough advancements in how much we're studying women, with the speed of which technology and things have just sort of sped up in our lifetimes. And so to think that the medical research hasn't been able to accelerate in the same way as technology is kind of shocking and upsetting. But I think that's the whole point of having these kind of books, is to really further that.
Yeah, and to say, okay, that is wrong, and hopefully this is changing. Hopefully the pace will pick up. And what are you going to do? Just throw your hands in the air and say this isn't fair?
Right.
No, you're going to say, okay, let me understand what we do know, really try to have a baseline information so that when I go to my doctor, I can say, okay, here's what I understand. Can we have this conversation? And I had a really fun experience where I had a new primary care physician right as the book, really the reporting for the book was done. I was finishing the book. And this PCP, I remember her eyes started to sparkle at some point in the conversation that I was having with her about my health. And I kind of looked at her and she was like, I feel like you're starting with such a baseline knowledge that we get to cover more ground. Exactly. And as I was really working on this book and writing and rewriting and revising and fact checking, I wanted my driving goal is to have every woman who reads this to have one of those experiences with a clinician, and their eyes start to sparkle because they're like, gosh, you're coming with this baseline knowledge that'll help us have really great conversations that'll help you be proactive about your health.
Right. And I think that's the whole point of having this as a manual to look at before you go in, so that you can ask more of the questions that are really going to impact you and help you in your everyday life. It's not like in that 20-minute encounter, all you've gotten to is explaining the symptoms and that's about it.
Yeah.
And that you haven't been able to get to any advice because there's just not enough time. So I think that makes it's very empowering for women.
Yeah. As I think about how I want women to read this book as well and use this book, I think really it's like how you can become a health journalist like I am for your own life, right?
Yeah.
As journalists, we ask questions, we do some background research so that we have a baseline knowledge to ask smart questions, and we get really curious. We figure out who our best sources will be for the story. And I think every woman can do this, right? If I'm seeing you, Dr. Kumar Singh, as a new patient, I can say, you know what, here are my top concerns. What I heard when I was reporting for this book is that what doctors want us to do is prioritize those lists of concerns, write them all down, but then prioritize them so that you don't, what we say in journalism, bury the lead. It's like if you as a doctor get my list of symptoms and then I save the most important thing for last, that doesn't give you enough time to really dive deep. So I really feel like with knowledge comes this sense of empowerment. Like I can make the most of these doctor visits because I have this knowledge and we can have these great conversations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, it's important to think about it's got to be more than just breast health. Like I really wanted to talk about heart disease. This is a typical one. When I was back in the ER, I trained as an emergency room physician. Heart attacks were the thing that the symptoms that show up in women versus men, like that was something that we really focused on. But most women don't understand what they should be even looking for to call 911 and say, I got to get into the ER because I'm having these symptoms, right? And
Yeah.
so, because the fact is that today heart disease is like the number one killer of women.
Yeah.
And most women don't think about that. We focus so much on breast cancer, rightfully so, but it's also not the number one thing that kills us.
Yeah.
It's cardiovascular disease. So, your book really talks about that. So let's get into the differences in symptoms between women and men and sort of what you found from your research with experts.
Yeah. My biggest takeaway is that in women, our symptoms are a lot more subtle. And
Yes.
that can be really tricky, right? Because we can
Mhm.
just feel a little sense of being off or a
Right.
little extra tired. And what woman doesn't feel a little off or a little more tired with everything we have on our plates, right? And
Right.
so
Right.
that it's tricky, but it's really important to know so that we can say, like, and also I think too, what I heard from multiple cardiologists is that intuition that something's a little off. So
Yeah.
it's that extra tired, but also this nagging sense of like something's not right should be a
Right.
red flag. Whereas with men, it's that like, arm pain,
Right.
crippling elephant on your chest. That can happen for women. It's just not as common. And the subtlety of the symptoms was really a big aha
Right.
for me.
Yeah, there's two things that you said, just so that we can maybe clarify for some of the listeners. Again, look at the book. There's a lot of information from cardiologists, but as far as what some of the symptoms are, it is not necessarily chest pain as many men will have. It's more this nausea, fatigue. They can have some back pain, jaw pain, some different things that you wouldn't necessarily think are about your heart. And so I think the second point that you made about your intuition is so, so important. And I know I talk about that a lot on this podcast of from an Ayurvedic integrative perspective, connecting back to your intuition is one of the greatest skills all humans have. And I think for women, it is so important for so many reasons. We have very strong intuition that we have been socialized to ignore. But then also, because we have such subtle symptoms and such symptoms that we haven't really learned about in the zeitgeist because it's all been focused on men, we don't even realize what's happening. And so trusting that intuition that you were speaking of, I think is so critical. I'm really curious, what did a lot of the experts say about intuition when you were talking to them? Did they bring that up as part of what they would suggest?
Yes, and again, it was sort of tacked on to the end, exactly the symptoms you're talking about, those subtle symptoms, but also when I asked the follow-up question, well, how do you know if that nausea you're experiencing is the flu or is a sickness versus the sign of a heart attack? And that's when they said, you may not know for sure, but if you've got that nagging little like inkling that something else could be off, go get it checked out.
Right. And so I think that's so important because the other thing that I'm thinking about is that for so long, women have been dismissed for saying that I feel like something's wrong. And so they go into their provider, they go into the ER, and someone will blow them off and their symptoms of like, oh, it's just in your head. And I feel like that is changing. And I think that women need to hear that from providers that I believe you.
Absolutely. And I think that's something else I heard, which is if you have that inkling and you go to the ER and you get the brush off, you can actually say outright, look, I understand that in women, symptoms of heart attack show up differently than they do
Exactly.
in men. Say that statement and then say, it might not be that. And can we check this out? Something in my intuition is telling me something is wrong. And
Right.
so, yeah, you can actually say that word for word, and then they're going to be like, oh, okay.
And, another one, heart disease is a really important one. But then even pain, this is a big one that I want to talk about because this idea of being dismissed, I think pain is one of those things that women are dismissed on all the time. Let's talk about that. How did that come up in some of the research and the talks that you were having with experts?
Yeah. So for sure, there is solid research to show that women's pain is not taken as seriously.
Right.
There is just so much in bias, really implicit bias that female pain, that we're maybe making too much of a big deal of it, we're just not believed as much. And for women of color, the story is even worse. One piece of research that really blew me away, which is that even trained doctors believed that pain sensitivity was different in women of color versus white women, which is just horrifying on so many levels. And I will say a big aha that I took away from my reporting on the pain piece is also that we as women tend to dismiss our own pain.
Exactly.
And I interviewed Dr. Vonda Wright, who is an orthopedic surgeon, and she said, I can't tell you the number of women I treat who have broken bones, who are
Right.
likely in agony, waiting for an orthopedic surgery.
hmm
And they're just like, oh, doc, I'm all right. I've got a high pain tolerance. And she said women often wear our high pain tolerance as a badge of honor. We need to take that badge off. Pain
Right.
that goes untreated can actually get worse, right?
Of course.
Exactly. And so we are worth, honest conversations about what we're feeling. We're not going to be seen as wimps.
Right.
Maybe what can help is knowing that we're already oftentimes not believed when it comes to our pain. So first and foremost, we got to believe ourselves. And then we have
Sure.
to talk in clear
Yeah.
language about what our pain is like so that we get the treatment we
Mhm.
deserve.
Yeah, because there are studies that show women are more likely to be given sedatives versus pain relief, right? It's like, let's just quiet her up, right? That's sort of the approach that's been taken for a long time. And so I also think that then women don't necessarily connect with their pain as much. If they're sedated, how are they supposed to be able to? They kind of just like, oh, yeah, I'm kind of sleepy. It dulls the pain, but it's not pain relief.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said something beautiful there. It's like, as hard as it feels to connect to our pain, like, wow, like we really do have to climb into our bodies and really sort of understand what we're feeling. So again, I think that helps us not brush it off as no big deal. It helps us give
Right.
space for what we're feeling and trust our own stories about our
Yeah.
bodies and our symptoms so that then we have the language we need to talk to the people who care for us.
Yeah, I think it's so much about the trust. It's like that first step is that awareness that something is not right. Symptoms that's information that our bodies are sending to us. It's information and it's up to us to just become aware. It doesn't mean you have to freak out every time you have a little bit of pain, right? But notice, I've had this pain and it's not going away, or it's coming and going all the time. It's been going on for months or for weeks, or it's intensified, whatever it is, become aware, because that's when you can start to think critically of like, what's going on here? Where is this coming from? What's my intuition telling me? And yeah, maybe I should look in this book and see like, what could it be depending on where it is in my body, and how can I talk intelligently about it? Right.
I heard that from clinicians and researchers across the board in every specialty. They want us to keep track of our symptoms and not ignore them. But it's
Right.
like, again, be a reporter with this. Be a health
Mm,
reporter. Just take out a notebook, or whether maybe it's the note app on your phone, and just
right.
jot these things down. These symptoms that you're experiencing, they might be nothing, or maybe it's going to help tell a story for your doctor to help you get care. And
Right.
I can speak about how normal it is to ignore our symptoms. I can speak to this
Mhm.
very personally, even as a
Yeah.
health journalist who has dedicated her life to talking to doctors, interviewing, understanding research. I
Right.
ignored my own symptoms for years. I had very heavy menstrual cycles, and I just assumed, it's like that's just my cycle. I was borderline anemic. I was really struggling with what I would call like my 2 to 3 days of like
Sure.
hemorrhaging every month. Turns out I had a uterus full of fibroids. And when I look back, I think, gosh, to younger Megan, I wish I had listened to some of those earlier signals and signs to be able to have conversations that might have pointed to this issue earlier and gotten me some treatment earlier.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think, you're speaking to something that is is very personal to me as well. I mean, from a breast cancer diagnosis. Now, I know I'm a doctor, and of course, I could critically think about it, but I'm also human where I noticed something on my right breast. My nipple was inverted, and I knew clinically what that probably meant. But I also watched it because I was a little bit of denial, like, no, it's okay. It's something will be fine. I watched it for like 2 weeks and then I finally did something about it. But again, I had that clinical background to be able to do that. And I got in quickly and got diagnosed and pushed through the system and did all the treatment and all the stuff. But that, of course, is not the norm. Most women are not physicians who are going to be able to think critically that way about a symptom that comes up.
Yeah.
But I think what both of us are really sort of saying is that let's start trusting our intuition, become a reporter, become sort of our best doctor, right? We are our own doctors. I always say that. And even though we may not have the clinical language, first tune into that intuition that there's something that's not right here and I need to ask the questions, right?
Oh, totally. And what I really tried to do in this book is to give women at least a little bit of language. Because first and foremost, we need to listen to our symptoms and believe our own stories about our bodies. And then even if we have that baseline knowledge, we don't have the language that you have as a doctor, right?
Right, right.
And we can still know where our organs are in our body. We can still understand some basic processes so that we're not just there in our doctor's office kind of giving away all of our power because we think you know everything and I know nothing. And so that's where it really does take a little bit of like, yeah, you can take the reins here. You don't have to go to medical school. You don't
Right.
have to study for years, but tucking into whatever your concern is, getting a little bit of language to have intelligent conversations with your doctor is something all of us can do. And it
Yeah.
really can impact our care. Maria
Yeah,
Maria often says, I think women need to become the CEO of their own healthcare.
absolutely.
And think about that. It's like when you're the CEO, you've got that big boss energy, you've got confidence. And if
Right,
you don't know a lot of things as a CEO, but you know who to talk to find the answers.
right.
And as women, we can do that. We really can.
Mhm. Right, especially when we're armed with that sort of the intuition, but then armed with some information. And so I'd love for you to describe sort of to the listeners, like how have you organized the book so that it's really user friendly? And then we're going to get into what the new rules are for women's health, because I'd love for you to talk about that. But
Yeah.
how have you organized it so that we can really sort of access it and figure out how to use it?
Yeah. So this book is divided into sections, and each section looks at an aspect of our health, and each chapter dives into a specific area, right? And so the book starts with anatomy because I really had this thought of like, gosh, I have been living now in this body for 46 years, and there was so much I learned when I interviewed anatomists for this book. Like we walk around and move around in these bodies, but oftentimes we don't really know where things are,
Right,
and
for
even just a
sure.
basic anatomy lesson can really be empowering and
Yes.
insightful. And then I move into a lot of the female specific, bikini medicine, right? And so, well, I touched on puberty before that actually, because, a lot of us are
Amazing.
raising daughters or,
Sure.
nieces in our lives, granddaughters, and puberty has changed a lot since
Yeah,
we went through it. And so
for sure.
yeah, and then sexual health, gynecologic issues, breast health. Like I mentioned before, that chapter really helped me again with
Mm,
screening and understanding various aspects of breast health, which is top of mind for so many women. And then part 2 moves into some of the specialties. So it's the immune system, heart health, brain health, etc. And then in the last section is kind of putting it all together. It's
right,
lifestyle, things we hear about that really do move the needle, like sleep and exercise and nutrition.
right.
And also, there's a chapter on navigating your health in this ever changing digital world
Yeah.
that we live
I
in,
love that.
right? Because we are bombarded with health information and misinformation and disinformation.
Mhm.
Now, how do we make sense of it? What do we need to
Right.
know about things like paying medical bills? Medical debt cripples so many of us. And so, there's really practical advice throughout the book that can help us understand our health and also, again, get the care we deserve and need.
Yeah. You're touching on something that I think is super empowering because I do think a lot of women, besides some of the things we've already talked about, right? There is the fear of like, if I find out something, how am I going to afford this? Well, how am I going to deal with it? And so sometimes it's just sort of like, okay, maybe if I ignore it, it'll go away. I know a lot of women tell me that. So I think that it's so important that you've addressed the elephant in the room by talking about it in the book. How did you think about that? That's incredible that you did that.
It felt really important because you're totally right. Whether it's we take the ostrich approach and we say, like, head in sand, I don't want to think about this, maybe it'll go away. Or, there's something, again, a personal story. I had a little accident at a Thanksgiving a few years back when I was working on the book, and a knife into my pinky finger. And that needed a trip to the emergency room, not urgent care, because it was Thanksgiving, the only thing that was open. And
Right.
I got a bill that was wildly high. And it turns out when I actually put into practice the information I had received from the expert source that I talked to,
Sure.
they had charged me for things they didn't actually do. And
Wow.
thankfully, I had pictures of my pinky to show them and to say, you didn't put stitches in this pinky finger. There was no skin to stitch. And so, anyway, it really was an eye opener in terms of, gosh, like, this is something we all deal with. It's something we dread, right? It's like on the to-do pile where we're like, oh, I don't want to have to call the insurance company or the hospital or the doctor's office to try to
Right.
unwind from this. There are actually patient advocates who you can hire to help you
Right.
with some of these things. That was a big takeaway for me.
Right.
So it felt really important because these are the other aspects of our health, right? It's not the anatomy lesson or the understanding of heart symptoms or how to keep your brain cognitively strong throughout your life, but also just like the day in, day out, which also, let's face it, most of us as women, we're the ones calling the doctors to make the
Sure.
appointments, to figure out the bills, et cetera.
And this is part of health. Financial health is part of our health because it affects our health. Every aspect of our lives affects our health.
Yeah.
To think that it's only about movement and what you eat is not addressing the whole story. It's about everything. So the financial piece is a big part of how we feel and our health, really.
Yeah.
So it's important to take that into consideration. Okay, so let's go into the new rules. You talked about being the CEO of your health. What are the new rules of women's health?
Yeah, I think, again, in addition to really being the CEO, which means understanding what you need to know to have smart questions, I think we have to talk about being an advocate for yourself, right? Which means really giving yourself the space to feel what you're feeling, to believe your own symptoms, to believe that they're worth airtime with your doctor, and then advocating for yourself. I really am a firm believer, again, in putting your reporter hat on and interviewing your doctors. This is an important relationship with the clinician you see for your care. You want to ask questions and
Sure.
really make sure they want you to advocate for yourself. So that's a big new rule. I think another overarching new rule is to come prepared when you go to your doctor's visits. You want to really come with your personal health history, with your family health history, with these understanding of the nuanced things that might be up for you. So let's say heart disease runs in your family. As it does in mine at age 46, I'm talking to my doctors about, when might be the right time to see a preventive cardiologist.
Sure.
These are the steps I'm taking, but like, let's get proactive, right? And so I think that's another big thing. And I think another real theme with the clinicians I interviewed for this book is it's all about shared decision making. You want to
Yes.
see a doctor. If I'm seeing you, we're coming up with decisions like you are the expert, right? Like, and I am going to defer to your expertise. And that doesn't mean that I have no say in the matter. I read a quote recently that I really loved, which is that doctors know bodies and we know our bodies.
Yes, absolutely. I remember back in medical school, I had an attending who was a neonatologist, and he told me, and this is relating to pediatric health, and he said, the thing you have to understand is that you will learn more about a child from the parents than you will from any book that I can have you read or anything that I can teach you. And I, since then have always kept that in the back of my mind of listen to what the patient is saying. They are going to tell you so much more than anything that you have studied. And it's our job as physicians to put that information together. What is the patient telling us and what do we know? And how do we bring that together? And so that is that partnership that you're talking about, is to really listen to a patient and understand where are they coming from, what are they telling me, and how does that fit with any diagnosis that's going through my different, the differential I have in my head. And again, when, like you said, part of this is also the way medicine has changed, right? We have 20 minutes or 15 minutes to see a patient and get all this information where, back when I was training, we had a little longer to spend with the patient and we could ask more questions and get into it more. So I think that you're also advocating for patients to change with the times also.
Absolutely. And there's a whole section in my book about how to make the most of shorter doctor visits, because that is just a reality, right? And the physician I spoke to for that said, you might just name to the doctor, I know we don't have a ton of time.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm thinking I'd like to cover today, but can you take a look at my entire list of stuff that's going on for me, and then you can help me understand if this is what we should go over today. And what she said, I think, is really poignant, which is that it helps her understand that, like, you get it, that you get that you would, as a physician, you'd probably love to spend a full hour with a patient or more if needed, and it's just not reality. And so naming that helps you tell your doctor, look, I know that you have limited time. Let's work together.
And what are some other things? That's great advice, but what would be some other things that you would suggest to the listeners that, I've got a doctor's appointment next week. What are some things I can do to prepare?
I think definitely, again, take out that notebook. I'm a big fan of just the old paper and pen. Our phones are great, but like take out a notebook and throughout the course of the 2 weeks leading up to your doctor's visit, really just start jotting down what's coming up for you. What are some of the symptoms?
Right.
Because I think when we just like do it in the waiting room, we're already a little stressed and it's not really preparing. And all doctors want us to prepare. You wouldn't show up for your appointment with your accountant around tax time without doing your homework and bringing her the documents you need to get that done. Same thing with your doctor. The more you can prepare. So lists of symptoms, prioritize that list of symptoms, family history, personal health history, just have a list of things you can answer questions pretty quickly to make the most of that time. And, even things like if you don't want to list out all of the medications you're on, take a snapshot with your phone of your medicine cabinet, so that your doctor can scroll in and say, okay, you're on this, and this, that matches what's in the system or whatnot.
Right.
Really, it's a sense of knowing that you're going to get more if you're more prepared.
I know. And it can be really overwhelming. I know for a lot of people who are listening, they're probably like, oh God, there's another thing I have to do. And I get it, because I will tell you, when I was going through that breast cancer treatment, there were times when I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't. One of the things that I learned, and again, this depends on what's going on with you, is bringing somebody with you to a doctor's appointment can be super helpful. And I know if that came up at all.
Absolutely. I definitely learned that. And exactly, like we ideally are our own best health advocates, but man, we can sometimes be our own best health advocate when we have an advocate for us sitting right next to us, whether it's your partner, your child, your best friend, and I think this can really help, especially if you get a little nervous in those appointments. If you feel like, oh, I'm going to lose my train of thought and not speak like I want to speak, your friend, your advocate, whoever you bring with you can really help in that regard. Yeah. And I think it becomes especially important when we're dealing with something that's really stressful, like a cancer diagnosis, like an autoimmune condition where you just feel like you're getting an onslaught of information. Yeah, tremendous help.
Yeah, I think for me, it was like I always brought my husband Kunwar with me, because half the time, even though I'm a clinician and I know what they're speaking, I was just blanking out at times, because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't, I'd get in my thoughts of like, I can't believe this is happening. And he could take notes or ask questions for me that I just couldn't think straight. So I think that bringing somebody with you, if you have that option, can really be really, really helpful and supportive.
Absolutely. And another new rule, so to speak, about breast health in particular, a big eye-opener for me in the reporting of this book is that we often think that breast cancer prevention means getting our annual mammogram once we hit 40, whereas actually that's breast cancer screening. When it comes to prevention, it's a conversation with your doctor about your risk factors, about your lifestyle habits, right? And about a screening plan to catch breast cancer, hopefully as early as possible. And so one thing, I actually did this yesterday because I recently felt a lump in my right breast. I suspected it was a cyst because I've had a cyst there before. And over the course of the last 2 weeks, it went down in size. So it's like, this is where I think knowledge offers peace of mind sometimes. And I still made that appointment because at 46, I said, you know what, I want to get this checked out. And what I did was the Tyrer-Cuzick a lifetime risk assessment calculator, which you can find online, before I went to that appointment so that I could talk about my results with my gynecologist. And It was a really great conversation because it led us to talk about my screening plan. So again, this speaks to just a
Sure.
little bit of preparation before we have these appointments can really pay off, I think, in the end.
Right, right. Can you tell us about that screening or
Yeah.
the score that you just talked about? I
Yeah.
think a lot of women will probably wanna know about what that is.
Yeah, it's something to Google. When I found out about it, I immediately called my mom and my sister, and they both took them as well. They have both brought their results to their doctors. And again,
Sure.
they each have had moments where their doctor's eyes lit up saying like, "Wow, okay, let's do this again." My mom's doctor said, "Let's do it together to make sure we're getting the right score."
Sure.
It is an online calculator that gives you your lifetime risk of breast cancer. Anything over 20%, as I understand it, is considered high, and that might warrant some additional screening. So a breast MRI in addition to an annual mammo. And so, yeah, it's something you can take. Olivia Munn has been a real proponent and real
Yes.
advocate of this test because that is actually how she caught her breast cancer. Her
Right.
doctor did this test and found out her lifetime risk was high.
And we'll make sure that that's linked in the show notes for all of the listeners so that they can just click into it and do it themselves.
Yeah, and I would also say too, again, this knowledge. So my lifetime score is 17%, but I talked to my
Mhm.
doctor and he said because you have very dense breasts, I recommend a breast MRI. And so I'm actually getting one next week because
Yeah.
we had that conversation. And again, instead of saying like, "Oh, I'm under 20, it's all good, no big deal." You can have that, well, what makes you feel comfortable? Would it be
Right.
right for me? And medicine is so personalized too, ideally,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But again, it points to the more we have this information, the more we can have these conversations with our clinicians where, and my gynecologist, it's not like his eyes lit up. He was just like, I think that's wise. And so you're not necessarily, depending on your physician, you're not going to get like an emphatic eyes twinkling maybe all the
Sure.
time. But still, I
Right.
walked away feeling like, yeah, right on. Go me, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, I think that, you're bringing up a really good point, and thank you for sharing about that. Again, we'll make sure it's linked in the show notes. But I think that, this idea of personalization is so important. When I went to medical school, the assumption is that medicine is personal. You're working with a patient one-on-one. The thing is that there is so much information now, right? That we tend to talk in generalizations. Generally, this is what you could do. Generally, you should get this kind of breast cancer screening. Generally, and that's great. That's important to know. And also, we have to personalize it. I mean, Ayurveda, which is what I specialize in now, is very much about personalization. It's about personalized medicine. It's the original personalized medicine, is what I would argue, because we're looking at patterns. And I think what you're speaking to also is this pattern recognition that most women don't have because they're not doctors. I almost feel like what your manual, what this book is almost a way to tap into those patterns to say, oh, that's what the patterns are for cardiovascular disease or having a heart attack. Oh, I didn't know that. Maybe
Yes.
I'll just keep that at the back of my mind,
Back of my
right?
mind. Or if I've got that little niggling, my intuition is telling me something.
Right.
Oh, maybe it's time to tuck into the immune health chapter so I can
Exactly.
understand a little bit more about autoimmune disease, why it happens, and then what should be on my radar in terms of various symptoms so that I can, again, come proactively to my doctor to talk about this. I had very high compliment from someone on my team at Penguin Random House where I said to the team when I first met with them in the marketing meeting for this book, I
Mhm.
said, I really just want this to help women. That was my North Star. It's like
Right.
we are smart, amazing creatures who make the world run. And so we got to take care of ourselves. And one of the members of the team said, when I got to the menstrual health section of your book, I made an appointment with my doctor because I started worrying that some of these symptoms, like I
Right.
wasn't putting it together. And then I put it
Sure.
together. And now maybe there's nothing wrong, hopefully not, but at least I made an appointment because I think I need to talk about it.
Right.
And it's a high compliment coming from you too. That's exactly what I tried to do with this, which is to help us as women understand what's normal, what's not, use it in combination with our own intuition
Right.
and our own know-how to then, again, get the care we deserve.
Getting that feedback from somebody who's read your work is probably one of the most thrilling things. My book just came out a year ago. Actually, tomorrow will be the 1 year of my
Woo!
book, The Longevity Formula. And so, that's the most thrilling thing. And I hope that that happens for you so much as you're, promoting this book in January. One thing I wanted to ask you about, for me, writing was very therapeutic. It was medicine for me because I actually finished my second book during my breast cancer journey. And it really helped me with my healing journey. I'd love to know, you have spent decades reporting on women's health. And then this book took you over 3 years to put all the information together, do the research. How did working on this book change the way that you think about your own body and your symptoms and your choices? How did it affect you?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question. I really think it helped me clue in to me in a deeper, more intentional way. I think throughout my 20s and 30s, I was just go, go, go. I am very pitta. I am fiery. I
You
am
are.
woo. We
Yes,
are
you
we are
are.
gonna charge ahead and do all the things. And I think
For
in many
sure.
ways that served me. And how's this for poetic? At the end of finishing this book, almost a year ago exactly, actually,
Mhm.
I had a hysterectomy. And out comes my womb because of fibroids. And so it's sort of like, wow, like this book and working on it and all the lessons really helped me say, okay, like my symptoms are worth airtime. They're worth
Yeah.
airtime in my own head, in my own heart,
Mhm.
to really understand what's happening with me. And it is worth talking to doctors to get an understanding of my options. And I think now I really try to, it sounds so funny to say this, but I really try to climb into my body. I have to intentionally do that
Mm.
because I'm
Mhm.
very outward focused. I'm very
Yeah.
driven. I'm a hard
Yes.
charger, type A.
You're a pitta. You're a total
I'm a
pitta. I
pitta.
know that about you. Yep.
Yeah, and so I think what I do intentionally now is say to myself, I'm not going to pick up on symptoms, these signals my body is trying to give me,
Sure.
if I don't actually climb in and sit with what's the pain, whether it's physical or
Mhm.
emotional, right? Like to
Sure.
quiet down and to do some deep breathing to say, what's up for me right now? You asked before what we can do before our doctor's appointments. And even if it feels too overwhelming to do that whole list of things, even I think just taking a moment to stop
Yes.
from the craziness of our days and just
Right.
deep breathe and say, like, let me get quiet enough to listen to what's coming up. That's shifted things for me for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really inspiring. And I think it just speaks so much to you walking the walk, not just talking about it, but actually really taking your own advice of what you've written in the book.
Yeah, definitely trying to at least. That's the goal, right? And this
Yeah.
book is dedicated to my nieces. So my sister has two young girls and my brother-in-law and sister-in-law have a daughter my nieces are just, I mean, they mean everything to me. And many chapters was almost a love letter to them because my hope is that this is another work that helps us push forward, right? That helps us make progress and that they're, my niece Sydney is in her master's degree and my younger nieces are in grade school. But gosh, I get so excited for them. Like, where are we going to be when they're
Right.
my age? How much
Yeah.
more are we going to know, hopefully? I,
Sure.
I think it's interesting. I was recently talking to Maria Shriver about this book and she said something. She's like, don't you think one of the new rules also is like the rules are meant to be broken? And I think there's something to that too. It's like, yeah, pull out from this what your new rules are. And then what rules do you live by or have you lived by when it comes to your health that totally need to be ditched? My hunch is that my nieces are going to think about the rules that I followed and be like, what? That was
Yeah.
crazy. But that'll
Right.
be great. My ultimate hope is
Sure.
that in 5 years, 10 years, like I need to write an entirely new 700-page book because we know so much more. That would be the goal.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so what is next in women's health science? Where do you see sort of the most exciting momentum and things happening? And what breakthroughs do you think are
Yeah.
on the horizon that could really change women's health in the next few years?
Oh gosh, I think the world is our oyster, really. I think with more women at the table, with more women
Mhm.
driving health tech, I think we're going to see some
Right.
really cool new technology. The hope is that our diagnostics will get so much better and
Right.
more specific to us because that was another big what? Like so
Yeah.
many of the tools our doctors use to discover disease in us were based on research in men. And so,
Sure.
yeah, so my hope is that that's going to keep changing. And again, the knowledge just grows so much more that we keep understanding, have a deeper and deeper understanding of the differences, these sex specific differences that are going to
Right.
drive our care.
Yeah. So I have one last question for you because I know we're coming up on time here. I call my podcast The Healing Catalyst because I really want to help people make impactful changes to support their health. That's the whole point of doing this podcast, and having these discussions. So along those lines, of everything that we talked about today, because it's not easy, right? These are all things that require some dedication and some thought and some care to do. What is one simple thing that our listeners could do starting today to really inspire that healing in their own bodies from your perspective?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, let's listen to our bodies. Let's not be moving so quickly and pushing our own health and symptoms aside. The dog should not get more veterinarian appointments than we get doctor's visits. If we can just take a moment to really listen to our bodies, listen to what our symptoms are trying to tell us, that's step one. And then step two is to really feel like you're working with a doctor, a clinician who wants to hear your story, who wants to work with you to personalize recommendations that are going to really help your health. But I think that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to then feel like you have a real partner in your care.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing, amazing advice. And thank you, Megan, for doing this with me. I am so excited to see the book. We're doing this interview before it's been published, so I got an advance copy, but cannot wait for it to come out. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I loved being here and I so appreciate it.
I love that conversation. One of the things that really struck me was this idea of using Megan's book as a manual, not something that you read cover to cover, but a resource that you can turn to when your intuition tells you that there's something just not right. And it's really that integration that I talk about all the time in my work and on this podcast, that beautiful integration of ancient wisdom and modern science to validate it. In Ayurveda, we've always known that tuning into your body, really listening to those signals, to the symptoms, to the information, and then trusting your intuition is where healing begins. And I think that Megan's book actually gives you the language, the research, the validation, so that when you walk into an appointment with a doctor, you're not just saying that something kind of feels off and being vague, you're actually more prepared. You can ask the right questions. You can really advocate for yourself. Because here's the truth. You really are your own best doctor. Not in the sense that you don't need medical care. I would never say that to someone. Of course you need medical care. But in the sense that you know your body better than anyone else. I really loved how Megan put it in the interview. She said, doctors know bodies, but we know our bodies. I think that is just so profound to really think about. And that when you bring those two things together, the knowledge that doctors have of bodies and medicine, along with your knowledge of your body and how it feels and how it works, that's where the real partnership begins. And I'm also trying something new this year on the podcast, at the end of every episode, which I'm calling the Health RX. So at the end of every episode, I'm going to give you one actionable takeaway, something that you can actually do because, information is great, but implementation is where healing really starts. So here's my Health RX for this episode. Megan talked about becoming a health reporter for your own life, for your own health. And I love that framing. So here's what I want you to do. Get a notebook or maybe the notes app on your phone. And for the next 2 weeks, or even just for the next week, jot down what's coming up for you. Any symptoms, vague, big, patterns, things that feel off, things that you maybe have been brushing aside. Don't judge it. Don't diagnose it. Don't analyze it. Don't Google it. Just notice and be curious. Because that awareness, that is the first step. That's your intuition speaking to you. That's your body giving you information. And when you start to become aware of that information, that's when things start to change. You can actually already be more prepared for your next doctor's appointment than most people ever will be. All right, that's your Health RX for this week. And speaking of your Health RX, if you haven't taken the free dosha data assessment yet, now is a really good time to do that. Because understanding your unique constitution or your dosha is the foundation of personalized health, and it only takes a few minutes. So go over to myarvasi.com, it's linked in the show notes, and just take a couple minutes to take this dosha assessment so you can really understand your body a lot better. All right, that's it for today. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a woman in your life who needs this information. And come find me on Instagram. I'd love to hear what you are taking away from these episodes. And remember, healing isn't just possible, it's in your power. All right, I'll see you next time. Until then, be well. Thank you for listening to The Healing Catalyst. If you found this episode helpful, please hit follow and share it with a friend. And if you feel inspired, please rate and review because it helps others find this podcast more easily. For more insights and tips, head to my website at avantikumarsingh.com. And to connect with me directly, find me on Instagram at avantikumarsingh. I loved sharing this episode with you. My hope is that you heard something today that sparks a catalyst in your healing journey and helps you build lasting health. Be well, and I'll see you next time. This is a Dante 32 production.